Bienvenidos a Teología sin Vergüenza, teología queer feminista que hace fluir la justicia.
¿Cuántas personas cristianas conoces tú que viven sin vergüenza, como queer y o feministas? Casi no se escucha de nosotros, pero sí existimos.
Estamos por todas partes, luchando en la academia, en las iglesias, en las casas y en las calles. Luchamos por nuestras comunidades y por nuestras propias vidas.
No somos machos, pero somos muchas.
Somos queer feministas sin vergüenza de tener fe. Somos teólogas sin vergüenza de ser activistas. Somos las sinvergüenzas.
Le sacamos el jugo a la Biblia para producir teología queer feminista que refresque la lucha y haga venir la justicia.
En cada episodio encontrarás teología bien jugosa, como agua de papaya.
¡Chúpetela!
Bienvenidos sinvergüenzas a este nuevo episodio de nuestra temporada en inglés de Teología Sinvergüenza. En esta ocasión tuvimos la oportunidad de entrevistar a Norma, que es una persona muy increíble que habla desde la teología, desde ser queer, pero también desde la salud mental, desde la psicología. En este episodio, Norma habla de su experiencia como migrante mexicana en Estados Unidos. Habla mucho sobre la violencia y sobre las narrativas de la violencia contra las personas migrantes, que es muy, 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 muy importante en este momento de la historia en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y no sé tú, Alba, pero para mí me pareció súper poderoso escuchar a alguien que tiene la capacidad de enmarcar esas conversaciones, tanto desde la perspectiva teológica como psicológica, ¿no? Creo que le da mucha profundidad a su análisis sobre el miedo, sobre el trauma que implica o que puede implicar la supremacía blanca cristiana.
Sí, y me encanta exactamente eso que ha trabajado. Es como habla de un camino de la cual ha caminado, no solamente acompaña a otras personas, pero justo en este momento también está acompañando a otras personas y a sí mismo. Y entonces para mí es muy importante reconocer qué significa para una persona indocumentada de hablar públicamente con su nombre en una plataforma tan público como Teología Sin Vergüenza, en este momento donde hay todo ese terrorismo espiritual y físico que le puede pasar. Y hemos tenido muchos episodios de Teología Sin Vergüenza que la gente, que las personas invitadas han arriesgado mucho. Y en esta ocasión creo que es una de las más altas que alguien ha arriesgado para decir su experiencia y también ofrecernos mucho consejo de cómo uno enfrenta la incertidumbre, cómo uno enfrenta sin saber qué va a pasar hoy, mañana y cómo podemos como apoyarnos a nosotros mismos para que el terrorismo de afuera no entre por adentro. Y creo que es muy especial este episodio.
Sí, claro, es muy sagrado, ¿no? Darte cuenta que alguien está poniendo tanto en la línea como ofreciendo tanto para visibilizar un tema, ¿no? Algo que a mí me pareció súper potente, en algún momento lo menciona Norma y me explotó un poco la cabeza, aprendiendo a identificar narrativas y quién se beneficia de ellas, ¿no? Y eso a mí me explotó la cabeza porque totalmente es cierto que cuando estás en un proceso terapéutico, lo que te ayuda a ser una psicóloga es como preguntarte cuál es la historia que tú crees sobre ti mismo, sobre tus padres, sobre tu comunidad, sobre los otros, y aprender como a identificar de dónde salieron esas historias, ¿no? A quién sirven y a quién no, cuáles son sus consecuencias. Y eso es totalmente lo que hace la teología, ¿no? Y lo que queremos que haga la teología queer y feminista, ¿no? O sea, acercarnos a una historia desde un lugar de curiosidad y de hacerle preguntas, ¿no? ¿Quién contaba esta historia, ¿no? ¿A
Ajá.
quién le beneficiaba que Dios fuera representado de esta manera, ¿no? O sea, solo se me
Sí,
hizo un momento de, wow, es verdad.
sí es cierto.
Y qué poderoso que Norma desde esa perspectiva sea tan clara para hablar de esta narrativa le pertenece a tal, ¿no? Esta narrativa genera violencia, genera dolor, genera separación Y desde ahí podemos y debemos confrontarla, ¿no? Y coincido en lo que dices de que es una persona extremadamente valiente que lleva toda su vida siendo una amenaza a la supremacía blanca cristiana,
Amén.
pero específicamente más recientemente desde 2017, enfrentándose directamente a
Ujú.
los poderes, ¿no? Y específicamente a personas que como acuerpan el poder, ¿no? O sea, como una persona que está dando una lucha legal, ¿no? O sea, como, sí, ¿no? O sea, por su vida, por su existencia.
Ujú. Me encanta.
Esperemos que a ustedes también les guste mucho el episodio. Ya saben que se pueden contactar con nosotros a través de redes sociales en @teosinvergüenza o por correo a teosinvergüenza@soulforce.org.
Que disfruten. Hola, hola, hi.
Hi.
Welcome to Teología Sin Vergüenza. I am so thrilled for our time together. We are new friends, but like an instant kind of connection of what I'm talking about with Soulforce and what you're doing with your healing work. So I just feel like this is a wonderful, why not just put it publicly out in the world, having conversations as new friends. So welcome to Teología Sin Vergüenza.
Thank you so much. I'm legitimately so excited to be here.
I am too. And we're going to start, as we always do, with the question of, do you identify as sinvergüenza? Why or why not? And again, for our audience who might not have access to Spanish, will you tell us what sinvergüenza means to you? If you have any experience with that word growing up in family or culture, just help us understand what your take on sinvergüenza is and how you identify connected to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think instinctively, I want to say yes. I have, these vague memories of being called that, like, que no tienes vergüenza, as a child and stuff like that. Coming from my perspective of now being a psychologist, thinking about how that translates to mostly related to shame. But I think colloquially, how we understand it, it's a bit of shame and guilt, which in Spanish, guilt would probably translate to culpa. But they're kind of intertwined, We try to sort of separate them and identify it as, so for example, guilt would be, I have done something bad, versus shame is, I am bad. I just think, though, in real life, the way that they play out, they tend to be pretty intertwined. And so I think it's a version of those. I don't have very clear memories, if any, of feeling, oh, I'm ashamed or feel guilty about who I am. What does come to mind, though, is the context, like, of who I am and my own history. And so when I was 5 years old, so I was born in Mexico, and when I was 5 years old, I came to the United States. And even at 5 years old, I could have a sense of, oh, this is different. People don't want me here. You hear that from the people around you in terms of for protection. Don't let anyone know about your status. To broader, on the news or TV or whatever, there's TV shows, that make fun of or make comments or this or that of people who are undocumented and those kinds of things. And so I think that has been maybe the thing that sort of pops out more, comes to the surface for me, or has been more integral to what I have had to sort of overcome in that sense of feeling shame or guilt.
Yes.
Because it's both. There's shame of who you are, because not all immigrants get treated the same. So there's that shame of, because of your skin color, because of where you come from, this is wrong. And then there's the guilt of, you've broken the law. There's something that you've done that's wrong and that you have to atone for, which never comes. And so that has been what I've had to deal with. That's been my life.
Well, it just feels, I'm hearing you talk about a political reality, and I keep hearing these Christian parallels in my mind. So it's like the difference between shame and guilt. I'm thinking about love the sinner, hate the sin, where it's like, we are told, a lot of us are told, like, well, I love you as a queer person because I'm supposed to love everybody, but I hate the sin of you behaving in any way, shape, or form that lives into the truth of who you are.
Yeah.
And how my experience with LGBT people is none of us can ever feel the difference between loving us and hating everything about our lives. Like, it just feels the same. It all feels like hate. And so it's like a split that can't really be made. And I think the same thing when I'm listening to you talk about the shame of this sense of you've done something wrong. And it reminds me of this original sin, because at 5, you're pretty damn close to original sin kind of time of like, what did that 5-year-old do that they need to like get on their knees and beg Jesus Christ to come in and cleanse their heart or whatever. Like, I got saved when I was like 5 or 6. I remember the like cartoon of the 5 fingers of the prayer of confession, that I am bad and I deserve to go to hell and it's only through the grace of God. And it feels parallel to like only by the grace of the president who grants amnesty, or like those kind of narratives that we start off at a negative or a like deficit that then we have to somehow make up or earn or submit to in order to get a gift of grace that we don't deserve. And so I just am hearing all those stories and narratives and Bible verses ringing in my head in a similar kind of like you as a 5-year-old coming here to the US has absolutely nothing to feel shame about in terms of like you as a 5-year-old breaking the law and that mingling between, you know, you broke a rule that said this is a line, that is a boundary, and you're not allowed to cross it, you know, on the hip of another adult who was bringing you here. And the same thing about we are sinful because some woman way thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago was interested in learning the truth of good and evil. And like, it's like that kind of nonsensical logic that makes us worthy of hell and makes undocumented folks criminals. Like, it all feels like it's mushed up together. So in addition to being a doctor of psychology, you also have had theological education. So I'm like, where are the intersections? Do you see those things too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is that just in my head? I mean, no, as you talk about it, absolutely. Even in the way that I talked about it, like this feeling of having to atone for your sins, breaking the law, whatever. Yep. And to some of your points where you're talking about the parallels of hate the sin, not the sinner, it was, for me, when it was around high school when the first DREAM Act started to become more popular, and there were students that were walking out of classrooms and stuff like that. It was like that parallel of, well, I care about you, but politically, this is not okay, you know? And so it's that, that is not accepting or loving in any way. In that sense, it's, that reinforced that I'm not safe, that I'm not wanted, that I have to continue striving for some kind of approval. And so in terms of the theological pieces, like, absolutely, because there's this false narrative of you were a child, so it's not your fault, but there's faults for someone, and they place it on our
there's an adult behind it. Yes. Which
and
is
so
also your family.
It's our family, but it's also not true. Like, theologically, our parents get sacrificed like Jesus. They get sacrificed for our sins. I don't know. At this point, I don't know if there's any theological grounding behind this, but to think of the border, though, like, that is something that we made up. It's not real. And so this idea that you're breaking a law, and that this law, that it's just the way it is because we so called it to be, now has these consequences, where I would say that people, especially you see it now, that they would say that we are deserving of hell because of wanting a better life. And the piece that's not get talked about, which is that how the United States, since its inception, is a violent history continuously. It's a violent history, and then it goes out, creates more violence, destabilizes these governments, and so people have to figure out how to survive. And so what are they going to do? They're going to do everything they can to survive.
Absolutely. And also, that isn't even mentioning the border that moves. I love those those statements that's we didn't cross the border crossed us. Like, and I think that is so relevant because it points to how arbitrary. I mean, I think the similar things are true of Christianity of there are some very fundamental life rules that are really great. Don't hurt other people, be kind to the stranger, feed the hungry. Those kinds of rules make all the sense in the world. But then there's this whole just like encyclopedia level of other things that you're not supposed to do. That's, well, originally, this kind of homosexual sex was an abomination, and eating shrimp was an abomination, and wearing mixed fabrics was an abomination, and all of those things were bad. And then at some point we decided, well, we all like camarones, so we're going to eat the shrimp, and it's okay to have, flexible fabric so that we can have both rayon and cotton so that it can breathe and be elastic. But then we kept this one about this homosexuality thing that wasn't even about like loving relationships. It was about a form of being like those on the other side of the border. There's just so many of those things that I feel like people hold as law that is as moral law, when in reality, it totally is dependent on the powers that be at any given moment. And that is true both politically, and that is also true religiously.
We're going to get into this idea of like free will and whether free will exists or not.
Oh, okay. Yes, let's go.
But I think as human beings in this Western context, we have this very deep pride of, I'm independent and everything that I think and I do comes from me and no one controls me. No one influences me. This is all me. When in reality, we are so deeply shaped by our context, our history, who's around us. We are so deeply influenced by colors. That's why we have this big marketing conglomerate of people trying to influence us, because it works. We are so easily influenced, and and so that's
some of us are more aware of that than others. Yes. I mean, well, before I had a kid, I was like, I'm stoic. It's fine, whatever. I had a kid. This is, a decade and a half ago now. And now I cry at commercials. I'm like, it's McDonald's or it's Coca-Cola. Like, I don't approve of these companies, but they show pictures of kids and people helping each other. I watched the Dodo. I'm just with all the little animals where they tell stories of shelter animals or whatever. I'm aware of that. And therefore I have to be really careful actually with what I take in, because I can feel my whole being. I worked hard at unlearning apathy, because when I first started working after college, I was working with recently arrived, mostly undocumented immigrants. And because we were doing direct services, life or death, every day, all day long, 10 hours a day for things like food and shelter and the police and all of those things, over time, to be able to do that for so long, I built up this really thick layer so that I could hear even the hardest stories, but still be like, okay, how do we get to social services? How do we get through to police so that this person who's experienced this domestic violence won't get deported? Also, it was just a logistics mind, and I had to do some really intense work around peeling back so that I could reconnect with the layers of what feels like to me humanity, which required effort, because there's just all of this information that comes that I learned later, terms like secondary trauma. And I wonder about you, who have your own lived experience, but also are a community level therapist. Will you talk a little bit about what is your experience? How has that been for you, who both have your own story and are receiving our siblings and our community members who are going through some of the hardest moments of their life, often when they come to you?
Yeah, it's a whole process.
Yeah.
But I think now where I'm at, I think the way that I would describe it is that I learned... So my school, the school that I went to, they actually did a really great job in the psychology aspect of it, and the formation of me becoming a psychologist, a clinician. And so I will give them their credit.
Yes.
However, it was also in the sense of our best interest. What a message that we constantly received was that we needed to learn how to sort of separate the work from our lives, from ourselves. And I get where
Like
that comes from, right?
compartmentalization?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I understand it in the sense of it's this idea of sort of not wanting things to spill over and for you to be okay and to have some kind of safety in the work that you're doing. I understand the thought. However, what I have come to learn through my own lived experience of I know what this is like, I know what this is touching. I relate to the idea that you talked about of becoming sort of hardened. But to me, I felt like that process started way younger, you know, where I actually felt like I had the heart of stone. And then God needed to create that into a heart of flesh. And so I'm in this process as this is happening. And in order to do the work, I think we do need a beating heart. We do need a heart that feels.
Yes.
Yes. And so that's what I have now, these last decade or so, have been unlearning that and learning how to feel. And then learning how to process and encounter and listen to then what I find when I feel. Because that's what we're trying to avoid. And so I've been learning to befriend what I have felt as like a black hole that gets created from the rejection, from the hatred, from the violence, from the instability, and learning to befriend those pieces and those emotions that come. That process, I think now I'm at a better footing. You have caught me at a better time in my life where I can feel it, I can cry, I can do whatever I have to do and process it and let it go and feel all the other emotions too, the joy, the love, the whatever. And that feels a lot more grounding to me in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah. What recommendations do you have? You've already named some of them, I think, like therapy and giving things time so that they can be processed and digested. Any other thoughts of those folks of us who are on the front lines, talking to people and listening to people's stories and trying to support in whatever the aspect of the work is that we do, and how we hold on to our humanity, how we hold on to that heart of flesh that you're talking about? Like, what are thoughts or recommendations around that? Because it feels like we are all, I can't speak for everyone, but I hear a lot of folks talking about trying to hold on to our humanity in this moment where it feels like we are being barraged intentionally to make us not human anymore, to not be able to understand basic humanity as a thing.
I think there's a couple of things that I think they're all connected. And so I think there's different starting points, maybe. Potentially one could be recognizing that you do have the capacity to face and to feel whatever is coming up. Because I think that's what makes the emotions or sitting with the emotions, recognizing them so scary, is because we don't have good models of how to do that. And so then we're like, well, I can't do that. I don't have the capacity to do it. And so first step is recognizing that you are bigger and capable to sit with and engage with these emotions and listen to them.
Yes, speak a word. Yes, speak a word of life over our people. We are capable. Okay, amazing.
The other one is our society. Again, this Western society very much benefits from our own self-deprecation. If I think I'm not worthy, that I don't matter, that whatever, then I can find other ways to buy that worthiness. So you matter, wherever you are, you matter.
Yes.
And so then when you connect those two, if you matter and you're capable, then you deserve to pay attention to yourself, to take care of yourself, to listen to yourself.
Yes. That feels like the work that we do when we talk about healing generational trauma, recognizing, yes, I have a lot of agency, maybe compared to others, or maybe compared to a different point in my life, like childhood. And we want people to use every bit of agency that they have and make that muscle strong, and self-determination and all of those things, free will, like you said, and that we come from a place, we come from a people, and especially those of us who are immigrants, who are first and second gen, we carry also all of that from displacement, whether it's chosen, whether it's economically forced, whether it's through trafficking, whatever it is, we carry with us that experience, along with experiences that go all the way back to colonization and before, both the strategies of resilience and finding places in our bodies and making ways out of no ways, and the heavy and the hurt and the hard and the, strands of trauma that are replayed again and again when we have these experiences over again. So I'm like, that totally comes back to that individualism of, yes, you are an individual, and also you are an interdependent being in a vast ecosystem of beings.
And so here's a little bit of a nugget that I think might help, is that it's bidirectional. So in the same way that we are individuals, we are also a part of. And so we tend to do to others what has been done to us. And we tend to do to ourselves what has been done to us. And so, that at some point, you start off nice, listening to yourself, and here I am. But at some point, you're going to get to, oh, wow, I can hurt people. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Unintentionally. Most of the time, it's unintentional. So what do I do when I intentionally hurt the people that I love?
And a lot of times I don't know, maybe I'm just telling on myself and others, but there is all of this shame and guilt that comes from recognizing that I've hurt somebody that I love in particular, and I would fight and die for these people, and yet, like my daughter, and yet there are times where I cause pain, and it is a lot of work to step out of that, like, self-deprecation, self-focus, like, I'm the worst, I can't believe whatever, and actually, like, connect with the person that I hurt and apologize and come forward, come clean about it, and ask for forgiveness at little things, not only just huge, awful things, but mostly like the daily little things. But man, for me at least, that's been a whole practice to not just melt in shame.
Because again, we're told that if we have to be perfect in order to be deserving. But once you can really connect with, nothing, absolutely nothing can take away how much worth you have, inherent worth, just because you exist, then that's not a problem. You're like, oh yeah, I messed up. I'm so sorry. How can I do this better? But if you're stuck on, I messed up and therefore I'm a horrible person, therefore I don't matter anymore, therefore, and you keep going, then we never get out. And we keep then doing the same things.
And we are isolated, which is the other part of being like, and I think that when I hear folks share stories around being undocumented, it's the isolation also that's like, you're in it alone or with your specific family group. But like when you're at school, you're in it alone. When you're on your own, you're in it alone. And that aloneness, I think, is so parallel. Dr. Ali Benitez talks a lot about the parallels between being undocumented and being LGBT. And I think there's just so much there that's like that same thing. We are taught that we need to self-isolate and we need to carry shame about things that are totally unchangeable and mostly uncontrollable. And that work that you're talking about is also the reaching out and the reaching across to be like, I am worthy of existing, and therefore have a responsibility to other people and beings who exist to be honest and morally integral.
As you're talking, that makes me think of, so when we cannot acknowledge that we have the capacity to also cause harm, to participate in practices that cause harm, and in order to defend against that, we sort of have to do a one-up. Because of whatever, I'm a little bit just more than you, better than you, whatever. When we keep doing that to each other, we keep replicating the same system that is doing that to us. When people talk about, well, what can we do to, change the system or help these communities or whatever, well, that means that the person that's doing the one-up, you have to take the risk to make mistakes. You have to take the risk that when you encounter and meet someone who's being detained or whatever, that you're going to mess it up. And just because you mess it up, it doesn't mean that suddenly you're like, I'm done. I tried. It didn't work. I'm going to go somewhere else. It means that you are like, I messed up. How can I do this better? How can I try again? And keep going, acknowledging those pieces that come along with it.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I wonder if you have thought about, well, we've talked a little bit about in past conversations around this moment of uncertainty. And so I feel like we've talked a little bit about this, and I would love our audience to hear about it. This time in particular feels so uncertain. And I'm wondering how you're feeling these days around that uncertainty, how that is showing up for you, and what you're doing in response to that uncertainty, how you accompany others who are in that same moment of uncertainty based in response of the spiritual and physical terrorism that's happening to our community right now, where people are being kidnapped off the streets. And I know there are so many people in the community and adjacent to the community who are feeling so panicked and so fearful. And you're a healer by trade, and also you're part of our communities because of just who you are and where you are in the world. And so will you talk to us a little bit about that whole thing and whatever feels alive for you right now?
Part of what we've been talking about is that I am going to feel the terror.
Yeah,
I do. I feel the terror. Not to sound redundant, but it's terrifying. You feel it. Again, me practicing what I said of even with that terror, I am capable to feel it. And I will cry. I will take my time to cry, to walk, to write poetry, to connect with friends, talk about it, people that are able to see it and name it with me. So all of those things. And recognizing what that means, that it can happen to me. Do I want to go through it? Absolutely not. But wrong time, wrong place, whatever that means, it can happen. There is no way to predict. So all of that, in terms of, the people that I serve, that I work with, it's there. We talk about it, again, based on the person's capacity. Because what I'm talking about, it's heavy. It's heavy stuff. Like,
yes.
And people are at different places in their journey. And so based on where they're at, we talk about these things, naming them, again, doing the process that I know how to do personally because I've done it, and what I know scientifically, all of that is bringing all of that together and making sure always that I never validate or reinforce the violence that is being thrown upon us. Oof. I'm always trying to name it like, this is violent. It's not okay. We're experiencing it, but it doesn't make it okay.
I think it is true that sometimes I hear people give narratives. I mean, this is terrible, but I was at church on Sunday at a new church, and somebody was talking to conservative Latino pastors. I think she was visiting South Dakota. And she was saying that their narrative was like, this is what has to happen for Jesus to come back. This is part of the apocalypse. This is part of, and so there are those narratives. I've also heard people's narratives of, well, everything happens for a reason. This is God's timing. And, maybe we did do something bad to deserve this. And those kinds of theological narratives come from the church, come from pastors, come from people who are supposed to be in charge of caring for our souls and our spiritual well-being. And it totally makes political structures invisible. And it attaches to God things that should never be attached to a God that we would spend our life serving or trying to emulate. Like, I wonder, have you heard any of those kinds of narratives, or how would you respond to folks if you did hear those kinds of narratives? What do you do with those in those moments where people are trying to make sense of things, but with theology that is it just rips my soul out to imagine assigning that to God.
I mean, they do come up. They come up in different ways. And just to point to what you said, though, that it makes political structures invisible and more powerful, because then you don't get to go against them directly. And so that's part of the work is, okay, where are these messages coming from? How did you learn or where did you hear that? And talking about a grounding. So in the instability of my life and all the things that have happened, and this actually, I ran into it today on Instagram. There's this video of Toni Morrison where I think she gets asked, what does it mean to belong? She talks about how, I hope I'm not making it a disservice, but it's something along the lines of recognizing that maybe not belonging to one place only or belonging to several different places actually talks about how free you are. And coming home to yourself. So that way you are always home wherever you are. Something along those lines. Part of creating yourself, your home, is getting to know yourself and getting to check in with yourself. And so I'm constantly prompting my clients to check in with yourself. Okay, so you heard this horrible message. Or maybe I wouldn't even name it at that point as a horrible message. But yes, you heard this message. What does that do to you? How does it land with you? What does it make you think? What does it make you do? Would a loving God send this message that is hurting you? Does that make sense? Or I do describe a lot of the different biopsychosocial factors. So like like how you were raised up with, like your family, what did they teach you? And then your church, and then your schools and stuff like that, because that's where all of these messages are coming from. And so that message, what was the function for that in your life? Oh, well, it was to try to get me to do whatever they wanted me to do. It was trying to get me to follow this and that. And so that's how we start checking in on that. And then, because I don't decide anything for them. The question again, checking in with yourself, is that something that you are okay with? Do you want to follow that? And then they decide. And most of the time, they don't.
And there's this freedom to have a choice at some point to be able to revisit what you've been given and do that sorting of, yes, I want to keep this. No, I don't want to keep that. I think that's such an important part of growing up, of being mature, both spiritually and like in terms of your consciousness. But most of us are never permitted that. So the fact that, yet another tick of why therapy is helpful and so important is because it literally just creates space to recognize, oh, I'm not that person who was a child or who was in that church or whatever. I'm my own person now and responsible, because that's what happens with sin. We are individually culpable. God gets the credit for good. We get the credit for bad. And there's no questions. You can't ask, you can't submit the recommendation box of how it could be improved. So you're giving folks so much freedom and space to think and feel for themselves. I'm going to shift us a little bit because I want to go all the way back to the beginning when you were when I was asking you about your relationship with sinvergüenza and shame and all that stuff. You were talking about documentation status as a thing that you carried shame or guilt around. And I'm like, oh, that's fascinating, because most people that I talk to, their first responses are around gender or sexuality. And when you and I have talked before, you're like, eh. And so I'm like, tell me about that. Tell me about those experiences with gender and sexuality, and how was that different, or what was your experience with that was not the like crushing shame?
I started feeling more like this calling toward God when I was like around 15 years old. And yeah, it's going to be conservative. Obviously, anything that was related to queerness, homosexuality, whatever, it wasn't good. It was bad. And so I did have those messages, and there was some kind of wondering, there's people that say that ever since they were young, they knew that they were queer in some way. I didn't. I've never really felt very attached to labels. What does it feel to be a man? I don't know. What does it feel to be a woman? I don't know. I know what it's like to feel like me. So yeah. And so I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing, but even in thinking about that of gender norms and expectations and you are this or that, that is something that I specifically really struggled with as a child. Once I had a say in what I could wear,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
never liked the texture of clothing, or it felt too tight, or I couldn't move, like I'm uncomfortable. So to me, I was like, I don't like it simply because of how it feels. And so then I just don't fit the gender expectation of being a woman. So I think in that sense, I've always been in very in between and sort of blurred spaces. And you could just kind of see that repeatedly in my life in all these different areas. So when it came to thinking about it, I don't think I had like a good clear of, am I this or am I that? And then it wasn't until I was in graduate school at a seminary where I was like really more coming to terms of, okay, maybe there is something that's been happening. And so that's where, yeah, I just had my first relationship with a woman. And it also so happened that I was at a place where other people were also exploring that for themselves, or they were just accepting of that was just not an issue. And so I never came out to anyone. It was just like, hey, if you're my friend, this is who I'm dating. I think so. Maybe the only person that I came out to was like my mom, just to let her know, because she would keep asking me like, because it wasn't just who's wanting to date you, but it was something like what man or what guy or whatever is wanting to date you. And I had to be like, it's not a man, Mom.
How'd that go?
It was interesting because there were other family things involved in that conversation. But honestly, at one point, I just told her, I'm like, this is not going to change. This is not a phase. So, you know, that's up to you. And then after that, it was just, it's not an issue.
Maybe mamas know their kids sometimes, and so it wasn't that shocking. But it is interesting. I love this orientation of, it's true. I feel a little bit that way about Jesus, where I'm like, do I love Jesus? I don't know. Do I know Jesus? No, I have no idea. What I know is the Holy Spirit. And that's what makes my Christianity what it is because I'm like, the Spirit makes sense. I can feel them. I can hear them. But Jesus was this like historical person at a particular place in time. So even if Jesus is one of my ancestors and I claim that, it feels so much more hard to quantify that kind of personal direct relationship, whereas Spirit's just always been with me. I just feel like from birth, from childhood. So I love this orientation of, I don't know what a man feels like, because we always get accused of like, you want to be a man or you want to be a woman or whatever. It's, I don't know what that feels like. I know what I feel like. And then, you know, some of us have different desires around how we present and how we want to be addressed and pronouns and all of those things, which is about, again, how we feel in our own beings about who we are. And I kind of love this. You and I talked before and you were like, I just did my own thing. I liked what I liked because I liked that thing and I was that thing. And so I think there's something so beautiful about being like, not leaving your frame to jump into somebody else's frame of goodness or expectations, but rather I am me and I am a good version of me in my frame because that's what I know. So I love that. I love that orientation.
And, you know, something you said right now about being good, because, you know, in these conservative narratives, the idea that like, if you're not with God, you know, you'll suffer some kind of punishment because of sin or whatever. And during that time, like I said, I was in graduate school, and for someone who's undocumented, to be in a doctoral program, to, you know, like funding is the very first block. There's no way. Like that is, there's less than 1% of us in graduate school and make it through. So to them, to the people that knew me, God was with me. Because how else could this have happened? And so I think to some degree, it's, well, is God with you or not? And, you know, like now that we know
you're confusing people.
You're with the woman. And so to some degree, it was like, nothing horrible is happening in my life. And so I don't know. I wonder if something about that was just kind of like, okay, whatever, you know?
Yes, I love that too. Whenever I spend time with fundamentalists or people who are super anti-LGBT and claim that it's about their faith, I authentically and truthfully say, like they say to us, I'm like, I will pray for you. And I am really explicit that I'm going to be praying that there are enough LGBT people that come into your life that God will help you see and have a change of heart of who we are and how much God loves us. And I always feel so heartened when particularly religious fundamentalist people are so confused because they're like, you sound like a Christian and you have a whole faith practice. And now that I'm ordained, it's a whole other layer of this doesn't make sense, but it does make sense. And that making sense and not making sense at the same time is really confusing because I can remember from my own fundamentalist evangelical days that I really did think that gay people had like horns growing out of their head. They were all like, pedophiles and criminals and drunks and like all these terrible stereotypes. And I feel like so many people, if you can hold on to the hate, you have to kind of hold on to those stereotypes. And then when you meet somebody who holds both of them together and like you're saying, like having this miraculous possibility, which we want to celebrate the hell out of that because congratulations. And you got through it, doctor. And that is amazing. And that is incredible. And all signs would point to not only is God with you, but you are amazing and brilliant in your own like trajectory for your work. But that is confusing. That makes sense. That would be confusing to folks. Absolutely. Why did you choose to go to seminary? Of all of the paths, why was it seminary?
Yeah, well, so I was an undergrad and I was doing my undergrad in psychology. There were a couple of classes that I took where literally the first thing that came out of their mouth was, this is a class based on science. There's no, don't come with your God, theology, whatever point. And so to me, at that point, I was trying to study the Bible and reading and stuff like that. And that didn't make sense to me because there were things that I was reading. And obviously, I mean, think about it, psychology, human behavior. How is it not going to be in the Bible? There's plenty there. Yeah. But people are surprised by that. And so I was reading it and I was like, this is telling me about human behavior. Just look at Proverbs or like the wisdom books and stuff like that. That's really easy. And so I wanted to go to a place where there could be integration of both the psychology aspect of it and the faith piece of it. Unfortunately, I don't think I got a good piece of the faith piece of it because, the degree actually that I went into was not the degree that I thought I was going into. So it's titled a Master's in Intercultural Studies. So I thought, hey, this is great. Okay. I want to be a psychologist and this is going to help me understand different cultures. It turns out that the classes are set up so that you could convert people of different cultures. And I was like, oh
my God.
I was like,
like a missionary.
I didn't know.
Wow.
And I didn't see any fine line or anything, So that's what happened.
Amazing. That's hysterical and totally understandable. I do want to talk about one theological concept because I feel like we really connected on the apophatic nature of God, which is a fancy word for folks who have not been through seminary, which is about the part of God that is unknown, the mystery of God. So will you tell us a little bit about why the mystery of God is important and about that not knowing and how that connects to your life and your theology?
When I first started, or I guess when I became a Christian and when I was trying to get closer to God and those things, one of the messages that I heard was, talk to God as if he was your friend at that time. and I took it to heart, I was like, yeah. And I would sit down and instead of the stereotypical prayer of, can you please do X, Y, and Z? I would tell God about my day. And I never heard anything back, but there was a sensing, a sensing that got built of what God feels like, the movements, you talked about the Holy Spirit of what that sensation, that embodiment of what that is. And during grad school, something that we haven't mentioned is that around that time was Trump's first presidency. And he had promised that he was going to take the DACA program away, which gave us a work permit and like protection from deportation. And he went and did what he said he was going to do. And because of how we deem people as worthy or not worthy, being someone who was undocumented, who was also a DACA recipient at a graduate school level, I was invited into this lawsuit. I said yes. And so as I'm in this piece learning how to, be a psychologist, do all the things, I'm also like fighting to survive.
Wait, what was the lawsuit? Tell us about this experience. This is really important.
So the lawsuit was against the Trump administration for illegally taking away the DACA program. And so that started in 2017. I started grad school in 2015. So for the next 4 years of my life of grad school, that's what it was. And we went all the way to the Supreme Court. We won. Wow. And then Texas was like, oh, now we know how to take the program away. And so the program is like, every time it's like just slowly hanging on by the tiniest of threads, but it's hanging on. And I take pride in that because, our participation, when so many people, even now you can see, there's very few people, one, who are willing to say no to these powers at be. And even for those that do stand up, there's very few that can actually stop them. And so we're one of the few that actually stopped him.
That's amazing. Congratulations. I feel like that's such an example of, in the face of horror and terror, to take back some of your own humanity and personhood and be like, we will fight because we are worth fighting for. These are our lives. And, I was the ED of a community center when the DREAM work started happening in the very, very early 2000s. And so many of those young people are now adults, have children, are lawyers, are all kinds of amazing things that they learned by unlearning fear, or not even not having it, but just recognizing, yes, it's scary. I'm scared. That fear is there. And I'm also going to resist. I'm also going to fight back. I'm also going to do whatever I can. And that sounds like you just snatched your own dignity, humanity, and worth, like right back from a system of dehumanization that was trying to insist that you were less than the full human that you are.
Yeah, and it's a constant process because, as obviously right now, that is the messaging. And so all of that is going as I'm in grad school. There's all these questions about just existential questions about life and God and what is happening and why am I here? And part of a piece that's, I think, important before going to grad school, because like I said, it definitely was a miracle.
Yes.
When I learned about this school, I literally prayed. I told God, I was like, look, if you want me to go here, you're going to have to do the things to move it. I will do my part, but then you have to do the other part that I cannot do.
Yes.
And I even said something along the lines of, I will go through hell as long as you're with me. And let me tell you, I will
God
never
took
pray
you
that
at your
again.
word. God was like, noted.
Yeah. By then, there had to already been some kind of trust and relationship between me and God for me to even think of saying that and to go forth and all of that. And I ended up going. And so there was this piece of, I literally do not know what tomorrow is going to look like. I don't know if I'm going to finish the program. I don't know if I'll get funding. I don't know if someone's going to come after me, because that's what it was before. They're taking the program away. I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know what's in front of me. And that gave me a very real, visceral experience of the unknown, of uncertainty,
Yes.
of literally, I cannot count on anything other than the very moment I'm in. And so
Yes.
that made me think of God, of we try to pin down God into some kind of theology or modality, or maybe not modality, but denomination of some kind. And
Mm-hmm.
at some point, to me, it felt, well, by definition, I cannot know God. God is infinite and I'm
Yeah.
finite. And so I'm not going to be able to take all of it in. But I
Yes.
can trust maybe like the character of God, like the God
Mm.
I've gotten to know. And then
Yes.
from there, I can kind of structure my decisions of where I'm going and what works
Yes.
and what doesn't work. And even when I don't know the full theology of, for example, like women in the Bible or whatever,
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that God is not going to oppress or punish or destitute women just because they're women.
Yeah.
I've accepted that I won't fully know all of God. They will
Yeah.
know me fully,
Yes.
and to somehow sort of do this dance of then living life in this finite
Mm-hmm.
moment with this sort of infinite being. And so that's kind of what it is.
Yes. That's a beautiful vision of that dance and holding the both ands and holding the like what we can hold on to and then the vastness beyond that that we cannot. And I wonder, as somebody who is both living through this moment and supporting others living through this moment. For sure, there are people listening to this podcast who are in similar situations. And so, as a healer, both from your mental health lens and from your theological study and experience lens, what are some words or thoughts or advice or good news or suggestions that you have for other folks who might be hearing this and for the first time hearing somebody putting together this moment and spiritual violence, spiritual terrorism, and this feeling of being enoughness, like all of these things around this apophatic God? I just wonder, you would be the person that I would call if somebody came to me and was like, this is the situation, and even if I can't change the external conditions, I need to get something sorted inside me. And you would be that human that I would call. So I'm curious, knowing that there are for sure people who are listening who are in a similar situation, what is a lesson or a word for those folks?
What comes to mind is first of all, your pain is absolutely valid. The terror
Mm.
that you're feeling, the anger, the even sort of like maybe even rebelliousness of no, I don't want to listen to anyone. Don't tell me that I need to heal. All of that is valid, and it's telling you something. It's screaming and yelling at you because it wants you to pay attention to it.
Mm.
And so in this sort of distant ways, I recognize that, and it
Yeah.
matters and it is sacred. And whenever you are ready, whenever you can listen to that pain, to that anger, and you can hear, my guess is that it's telling you how much you matter, despite
Mm.
what everyone else is telling you.
Ooh.
Once you can hear that and hold it in there, there's an invitation to come and to be held by
Mm.
this being who is beyond all of the things that are happening, but not just beyond,
Yes.
because it's, at least my view is not that God is separate, but
Yes.
that they are beyond and with us in the moment. I cannot predict what's going to happen. There's so much that has and that will happen that is horrible and
Yes.
terrifying. But in that moment where you are still breathing, God
Yes.
is still holding.
Oof. Ooh, I'm just going to let that breathe for a minute. I feel like so many of us need to hear that. It's that incredible presence that you're talking about. I have this moment right here, and that is something. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here with us. And thank you for spending your time with us. Our last question is always, who are your ancestors? What is your fount of ancestral wisdom? Who do you think of when you need to be reminded of who you are and where you come from? And, that interconnectedness that we were talking about, who is that for you, or who comes to mind? Be they blood or cultural or theological, psychology, wherever those come from. Who are those reference points?
For a really long time, I felt very uprooted and disconnected from anything or anyone, from my culture, right? Like I said, at 5 years old, at that time, I don't even remember what I would have been learning, and then traditions and stuff like that. My family didn't grow up with traditions. And so for a long time, I felt that disconnect and uprootedness. This last time, though, that I was able to go to Mexico, I was able to see family that I hadn't seen since I was in 30 years. I was able to see my grandmother a different time, but to be in the place where I was born, that changed something in me. So there's a piece of a connection to a place, a connection to the people that I met. I reconnected with my godmother, and just that there's a piece of that I think has been really forming me in new ways. And then there's the just historical relationship that I've had with God on and off throughout the years. And so, I think that's sort of what I connect to. I'm careful about claiming any ancestry that I haven't really had that experience to be raised or to be influenced by. But I would hope to be able to reconnect more as the years goes on.
Amen. Amen and amen. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being you. I think there's so much to be learned and gained, and I think folks will hear so much that resonates. And I know I've certainly felt that in this time. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a Sinvergüenza with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun.
Me too.
Gracias por escucharnos. Síguenos en las redes sociales @teosinvergüenza y únete a nuestra lista de difusión en WhatsApp.
Comparte tus ideas y tus historias con nuestra comunidad en Facebook o Instagram usando el hashtag Las Sinvergüenzas.
Comparte este episodio con alguien a quien amas y danos 5 estrellas en la plataforma donde escuchas este podcast.
Y pendiente a nuestro próximo episodio para que conozcas a otra teóloga sin vergüenza de ser activista.
Somos las Sinvergüenzas.
¿Eres tú uno de nosotros?
¡Sí!